My name is Eric, and I've been a professional killer for 8 years. It's not the kind of career path they discuss in high school guidance counseling, but life has a way of leading you down unexpected roads. I'm good at what I do, precise, efficient, emotionally detached. I don't ask questions about why someone needs to die. I don't get involved in the politics of my contracts, and I certainly don't develop feelings for my targets. At least, that was true until I was hired to kill Brandon Castellano. The contract came through my usual channels, an encrypted message with a photograph, basic background information, and a payment amount that was significantly higher than my standard fee. The target was Brandon Castellano, 34 years old, head of the Castellano crime family that controlled most of the illegal gambling and loan sharking operations on the East Coast. The client was anonymous, as they always were, but the money was real and the timeline was generous. I had 6 weeks to study my target and find the right opportunity. The bonus for a clean execution was substantial enough to let me retire early if I wanted to. I should have known something was different about this job from the beginning. The payment was too generous, the timeline too relaxed, and the target's profile too detailed. But I was focused on the technical aspects of the assignment, not the unusual circumstances surrounding it. Brandon Castellano wasn't what I expected from a crime boss. My research revealed a man who had inherited his father's organization at 25 and had spent the last 9 years transforming it from a violent, street-level operation into something more sophisticated. Under his leadership, the Castellano family had moved away from drugs and human trafficking, focusing instead on gambling, legitimate business investments, and what law enforcement euphemistically called financial services. He was educated, MBA from Wharton, and reportedly more interested in building a sustainable criminal enterprise than engaging in the kind of territorial wars that had defined his father's generation. He lived modestly for someone of his wealth and position, owned several legitimate businesses, and had a reputation for being reasonable in his dealings with both rivals and subordinates. None of this mattered to me professionally. I'd killed corrupt politicians, abusive CEOs, and genuinely evil people, but I'd also eliminated targets who were probably decent humans who'd simply made enemies of the wrong people. Moral judgments weren't part of my job description. I spent the first 2 weeks studying Brandon's routines, mapping his security arrangements, and identifying potential opportunities. He lived in a penthouse apartment with excellent security, worked from an office building that was essentially a fortress, and traveled in armored vehicles with professional bodyguards. But he also had vulnerabilities. Every Tuesday evening, he visited his mother at a nursing home in Queens, usually alone or with minimal security. He had a standing reservation at a small Italian restaurant where he ate dinner every Friday night, always at the same corner table. And twice a week, he worked out at an exclusive gym where the security was more about privacy than protection. Any of these locations would have provided opportunities for a clean kill. A sniper shot from a building across from the nursing home. Poison in his wine at the restaurant. An accidental equipment malfunction at the gym. I had my first clear shot 3 weeks into the surveillance period. Brandon was leaving the nursing home after his weekly visit, walking alone to his car parked in a dimly lit section of the facility's parking garage. His bodyguard was waiting by the vehicle, but there was a 40-foot gap between the building exit and the car where Brandon would be completely exposed. I was positioned on the roof of an adjacent building with a clear line of sight and a rifle equipped with a suppressor. The shot was easy, maybe 150 yards, minimal wind, perfect visibility. I'd made harder kills under much more challenging circumstances. I lined up the shot, controlled my breathing, and placed my finger on the trigger. And then I hesitated. It wasn't fear or technical uncertainty. I'd done this hundreds of times before. It was something else, something I couldn't immediately identify. A nagging sense that I was missing something important about this contract, about this target, about the entire situation. I told myself it was professional caution and decided to wait for a better opportunity. The second chance came the following Friday at the restaurant. I'd gotten a job as a server, a position that gave me access to Brandon's table and the opportunity to introduce something lethal into his food or drink. The restaurant was small and intimate, with subdued lighting that would make it difficult for anyone to get a clear look at my face. Brandon arrived at his usual time, alone as always, and was seated at his preferred corner table. I approached with the wine list, prepared to begin the conversation that would end with his death. "Good evening, Mr. Castellano. Can I start you with something to drink?" He looked up from the menu, and I got my first close look at the man I'd been hired to kill. Brandon Castellano was undeniably handsome. Dark hair, olive skin, and intense brown eyes that seemed to see more than they should. But it was his expression that caught me off guard. There was intelligence there, yes, but also a kind of weariness that suggested the weight of his responsibilities. When he smiled at me, it was genuine and warm, not the calculated charm I'd expected from a career criminal. "I'll have the Chianti," he said. "The 2018 if you have it." "Excellent choice. Have you decided on dinner, or do you need a few more minutes?" "I always get the same thing, osso buco with risotto. But I'm curious about the special tonight. What can you tell me about it?" He was making conversation, treating me like a person rather than just another service provider. It was such a normal interaction that I almost forgot why I was there. "The special is braised short ribs with polenta. The chef does something interesting with the reduction, adds a touch of coffee that gives it complexity without being overpowering." "That sounds intriguing. You know, I've been coming here for 2 years, and I don't think I've seen you before." "I'm new. Started last week." "Well, welcome to the neighborhood. I'm Brandon." He extended his hand for a handshake, a gesture so unexpectedly normal that I took it automatically. His grip was firm and warm, and there was something about the contact that sent an unexpected jolt through my system. "I'm Eric," I said, then immediately regretted giving my real name. "Nice to meet you, Eric. I think I'll try that special after all." I should have poisoned his wine right then. I had a small vial of something tasteless and fast-acting in my pocket, and it would have been simple to introduce it when I went to get his glass. Instead, I found myself serving him an excellent dinner and making small talk whenever I stopped by his table. Brandon was charming in a way that seemed effortless rather than calculated. He asked about my background, seemed genuinely interested in my answers when I improvised a story about being new to the city, and tipped generously when he left. He also made a point of complimenting my service to the manager, which was completely unnecessary but somehow typical of what I was learning about his character. I told myself I was gathering intelligence, learning more about the target to improve my chances of success on the next attempt. But the truth was, I was starting to like him. The third opportunity came at the gym. I'd managed to get a guest membership and had been timing my workouts to coincide with Brandon's sessions. He followed the same routine every Tuesday and Thursday, 45 minutes of weights, 20 minutes of cardio, then 15 minutes in the steam room. The steam room was perfect. Private, no security cameras, and easy to make a death look like a heart attack or accident. All I needed was to be alone with him for 30 seconds. I was sitting in the steam room when Brandon entered, wearing only a towel and looking more relaxed than I'd ever seen him. Without the expensive suits and constant awareness of security threats, he looked younger, more approachable. "Good workout?" he asked, settling onto the bench across from me. I'd darkened my hair and was wearing colored contacts, but I was still nervous about being recognized from the restaurant. "Not bad. You come here often?" "Couple times a week. Helps me think." Brandon leaned back against the wall, closing his eyes. "Sometimes the only quiet I get is in here." "Stressful job." "You could say that. Family business. Lots of expectations, lots of people depending on me to make the right decisions." "What kind of business?" Brandon opened his eyes and looked at me with an expression that suggested he was deciding how much to reveal. "Import-export. My grandfather started it, my father expanded it, and now it's my responsibility to keep it running." It was technically true, if you considered illegal gambling and loan sharking to be import-export services. Must be pressure, following in the family footsteps. Sometimes I wonder what I would have done if I'd had a choice. Maybe something completely different. Brandon's voice was thoughtful, almost melancholy. "What about you? Always wanted to be in, what did you say, consulting?" I told him I was a business consultant, another improvised cover story. "Not really. I kind of fell into it. Sometimes life doesn't give you the choices you think you'll have." Yeah, I understand that. We sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, and I found myself studying Brandon's profile in the dim light of the steam room. He looked tired, carrying the kind of exhaustion that came from years of difficult decisions and heavy responsibilities. There was something almost vulnerable about him in this setting, stripped of the armor of expensive clothes and bodyguards. I could have killed him easily. A quick injection, hold him underwater for a few seconds, make it look like he'd passed out and drowned. Clean, untraceable, exactly the kind of death that would look accidental. Instead, I found myself asking, do you ever think about walking away? From the family business, I mean. Brandon looked at me with surprise. Why do you ask? You just seem like someone who might have other interests. Other talents. I do, actually. I studied literature in college, before the MBA. Always thought I might like to teach, maybe write. Brandon's smile was self-deprecating. Not very practical for someone in my position. Maybe not. But it's interesting that you think about it. What about you? If you could do anything, what would it be? The question caught me off guard. I'd spent so many years focused on the mechanics of killing that I'd stopped thinking about alternatives, about what I might want from life beyond the next contract. I don't know, I said honestly. I've been doing the same thing for so long. I'm not sure I remember what else I might be good at. Everyone's good at something. Sometimes it just takes the right circumstances to discover what it is. We talked for another 10 minutes before Brandon left, and I sat alone in the steam room, trying to understand what was happening to me. This was the third time I'd had a clear opportunity to complete my contract, and the third time I'd chosen conversation over killing. I was compromised, and I needed to figure out why. Over the next 2 weeks, I found myself manufacturing excuses to be around Brandon. I picked up extra shifts at the restaurant on nights when I knew he'd be there. I timed my gym visits to coincide with his workouts. I even started frequenting a coffee shop near his office building, hoping to catch glimpses of him during his lunch breaks. It was completely unprofessional and potentially dangerous, but I couldn't seem to stop myself. Every interaction revealed new layers to Brandon's personality. His dry sense of humor, his genuine concern for his employees, his unexpected knowledge of art and literature. He was nothing like the stereotypical crime boss I'd expected to find. More troubling was the way he seemed to notice me. At the restaurant, he would specifically request my section. At the gym, he'd seek me out for conversation. At the coffee shop, he'd smile and nod when our eyes met across the room. You know, Brandon said one evening at the restaurant as I brought him his usual Chianti, I'm starting to think you're following me. My blood turned to ice. What do you mean? I see you everywhere. Here, the gym, that coffee place on 5th Street. Either you live in this neighborhood too, or you're keeping tabs on me for some reason. I tried to keep my expression neutral. I live a few blocks away. Guess we just frequent the same places. Maybe. Or maybe you're more interesting than you pretend to be. Before I could respond, Brandon's phone buzzed with a text message. He glanced at it, and his expression immediately changed from relaxed to tense. I have to go, he said, leaving money on the table without finishing his dinner. Eric, can I ask you something? Sure. If someone was in danger, and you could help them, would you? Even if it meant getting involved in something complicated? The question was so unexpected that I answered honestly. I think it would depend on the person. Brandon studied my face for a moment, then nodded. That's a good answer. I'll see you around. He left quickly, and I noticed that he seemed more alert than usual, checking his surroundings as he walked to his car. Something had spooked him, and I found myself worried about his safety in a way that had nothing to do with protecting my contract. I followed him. It was completely against my training and professional protocols, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Brandon was walking into some kind of trap. I stayed well back, using techniques I'd learned for surveillance, and watched as his car headed toward the warehouse district on the outskirts of the city. Brandon's car pulled into an industrial complex and parked outside a building that looked abandoned. But there were other vehicles there, expensive cars that seemed out of place in the derelict surroundings. Through my binoculars, I could see men posted at strategic positions around the building, clearly serving as lookouts. This was some kind of meeting, and from Brandon's body language as he approached the building, it wasn't one he was looking forward to. I positioned myself on the roof of an adjacent warehouse, close enough to observe, but far enough away to avoid detection. Through the windows of the meeting building, I could see figures moving around a large table, but the details were impossible to make out. 20 minutes later, gunshots erupted from inside the building. My first instinct was professional detachment. Criminal meetings gone wrong were occupational hazards, and Brandon's death here would simply complete my contract without requiring my direct involvement. But that detached analysis lasted about 2 seconds before I found myself moving toward the building, gun drawn, with no clear plan beyond making sure Brandon was safe. The lookouts were focused on the building, not expecting threats from outside, so I was able to approach undetected. Through a side window, I could see the scene inside, a meeting that had clearly become an ambush. Brandon was on the ground behind an overturned table, blood visible on his shirt, while men with guns advanced on his position. I recognized one of the attackers immediately, Vincent Reyes, Brandon's lieutenant and second-in-command. This wasn't a rival family's ambush. It was a coup from within Brandon's own organization. I had about 3 seconds to decide what to do. Complete my original contract by letting the situation play out, or intervene to save the man I'd been hired to kill. I put 2 bullets through the window and rolled inside. The next few minutes were chaos. I had the advantage of surprise and better training than Brandon's would-be assassins, but I was outnumbered and fighting in an unfamiliar environment. I managed to take down 3 of Vincent's men before Brandon, despite his injury, joined the fight. "Eric." Brandon's voice was strained with pain and confusion. "What the hell are you doing here?" "Saving your life, apparently. Can you move?" "Yeah, but I'm hit pretty bad." "Eric, how did you?" "Questions later. Right now we need to get out of here before reinforcements arrive." I helped Brandon to his feet, and we made our way toward the exit, checking corners and staying low. Vincent was nowhere to be seen, which meant he'd either fled or was positioning himself for another attack. "My car's around back," Brandon said as we reached the building's rear exit. "Mine's closer. Can you make it 50 yards? Do I have a choice?" We made it to my car without encountering resistance, but Brandon was losing blood fast and needed medical attention. I couldn't take him to a hospital. Too many questions, too much official attention. But I knew people who provided medical services without asking for identification or filing reports. "Eric," Brandon said as I drove toward the safe house where I knew a doctor would treat gunshot wounds for cash. "I need to know who you really are." "Does it matter right now?" "It matters because you just saved my life, and I don't believe in coincidences. You've been following me for weeks. You're clearly trained in combat, and you happen to be in the right place at the right time to stop an assassination attempt." I couldn't argue with his logic. "You're right. I haven't been honest with you." "So who are you?" I made a decision that would either get us both killed or change everything between us. "I'm the person who was hired to kill you." Brandon was quiet for so long that I thought he might have passed out from blood loss. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. "Hired by whom?" "I don't know. The contract was anonymous, like they always are. And you decided to save me instead because I couldn't do it. Because over the past month, I got to know you, and you're not what I expected. Because the idea of you dying makes me sick." "Jesus, Eric, do you understand what you're telling me? That I'm probably in love with you?" "Yeah, I'm starting to figure that out." We arrived at the safe house, and I carried Brandon inside while he processed my confession. Dr. Martinez, who had treated my injuries several times over the years, took one look at Brandon's wound and immediately got to work. "Bullet went through clean," she said after examining him. "Missed anything vital, but he's lost a lot of blood. He needs rest and antibiotics, but he'll be fine." While Dr. Martinez worked on Brandon, I tried to figure out our next move. Vincent's coup attempt had failed, but he was still out there, still a threat. And now that I'd revealed my true identity to Brandon, I had to assume my own life was in danger as well. "Eric," Brandon called from the treatment table. "Come here." I approached cautiously, unsure what his reaction would be now that the immediate danger had passed, and he'd had time to think about what I told him. "Sit down," he said. "We need to talk." "Brandon, I know this is complicated." Complicated doesn't begin to cover it. The man I've been falling for over the past month turns out to be a professional killer who was hired to murder me. I stared at him. You've been falling for me? Of course I have. Why do you think I kept showing up at places where I knew you'd be? Why do you think I was asking you hypothetical questions about helping people in danger? Brandon tried to sit up, then thought better of it. Eric, I've been trying to figure out how to ask you out without violating about a dozen different protocols about civilians and operational security. You wanted to ask me out? I wanted to do a lot more than ask you out. But I thought you were a business consultant who happened to be the most interesting person I'd met in years. And now that you know what I really am. Brandon was quiet for a moment, studying my face. Now I know that you chose to save my life instead of completing a contract that probably would have paid you enough to retire. That means something. It means I'm compromised and probably not much good as a killer anymore. Maybe being compromised isn't such a bad thing. Dr. Martinez finished bandaging Brandon's wound and left us alone with instructions about care and medication. We sat in silence for a while, both trying to process the events of the evening and what they meant for whatever was developing between us. Eric, Brandon said finally, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Okay. Do you know who hired you to kill me? No. The contract came through encrypted channels. Payment was made through cryptocurrency. No direct contact. It's standard procedure for high-level contracts. But you could find out? Maybe. It would be dangerous and would probably expose me to whoever wants you dead. What? Because Vincent didn't organize tonight's ambush on his own. He doesn't have the resources or connections to plan something like that. Someone else is pulling the strings, someone who wanted me dead but decided to use my own organization against me when the professional assassination didn't work out. I hadn't considered that possibility, but it made sense. You think whoever hired me also turned Vincent? I think someone has been playing a longer game than either of us realized. And I think you and I are both targets now. Over the next few days, as Brandon recovered from his injury, we worked together to unravel the conspiracy that had brought us together. I used my professional contacts to trace the source of my original contract, while Brandon investigated which of his business rivals had the resources and motivation to orchestrate such an elaborate plan. What we discovered was worse than either of us had imagined. The contract on Brandon's life had been taken out by Marcus Delacroix, the head of a rival crime family that had been losing territory to Brandon's more sophisticated operations. But Delacroix hadn't just hired me. He'd also been secretly funding Vincent's ambitions and promising him control of the Castellano organization in exchange for eliminating Brandon from within. It's actually brilliant, Brandon said as we reviewed the evidence we'd gathered. If you'd succeeded, I'd be dead and Vincent would have taken over with Delacroix's backing. When you didn't complete the contract, Vincent moved to Plan B and tried to kill me himself. And now Vincent is in hiding. Delacroix thinks both his plans failed, and he's probably planning something even more direct. What do we do? Brandon looked at me across the table where we'd spread out documents, photographs, and financial records. We end this. Permanently. That's not really my area anymore. I seem to have lost my taste for killing people. I'm not talking about killing anyone. I'm talking about destroying Delacroix's operations so completely that he'll never be able to threaten anyone again. What followed was the most complex and dangerous operation I'd ever been involved in. Using my skills for infiltration and surveillance, combined with Brandon's knowledge of criminal organization and financial networks, we systematically dismantled Delacroix's empire from within. We started by exposing his money laundering operations to federal investigators, providing detailed evidence that led to the seizure of millions in assets. Then we leaked information about his drug trafficking routes to rival organizations, sparking a series of conflicts that destroyed his distribution network. The final blow came when we revealed Vincent's location to Delacroix's rivals, making it clear that Vincent had been cooperating with federal investigators in exchange for protection. Delacroix's own people eliminated the threat Vincent represented, not knowing that we had orchestrated the entire situation. 3 weeks later, Marcus Delacroix was arrested on federal charges that would keep him in prison for the rest of his life. His organization collapsed without leadership, and the threat to Brandon's life disappeared along with it. So what happens now? I asked Brandon as we sat in his apartment, sharing a bottle of wine and watching the sunset over the city skyline. Now we figure out what we want to be to each other. I'm not sure I know how to be anything other than what I've been. Then we learn together. Eric, I'm not asking you to become someone different. I'm asking if you want to build something with me based on who we actually are, not who we pretended to be. I looked at Brandon, this man I'd been hired to kill and ended up saving. This criminal who read literature and worried about his employees. This person who had seen the worst parts of my nature and somehow still wanted to be with me. I want that, I said. But I need you to understand that I'm not a good person. I've killed people for money. I've destroyed lives for the right price. And I run a criminal organization. I've made decisions that hurt people, broken laws, lived outside society's rules for my entire adult life. Brandon moved closer, taking my hand. We're both complicated people, Eric. Maybe that's why we understand each other. Maybe. I love you, Brandon said simply. I love your intelligence, your skill, your willingness to risk everything to save someone you cared about. I love that you chose me over a contract that would have set you up for life. I love you too, even though you're probably going to get me killed eventually. I'll do my best to keep that from happening. 6 months later, I officially retired from the assassination business and became Brandon's head of security, a position that allowed me to use my skills for protection rather than destruction. It wasn't the clean break from my past that some people might have chosen, but it was honest about who we both were and what we'd built together. Any regrets? Brandon asked one evening as we reviewed security reports for his legitimate businesses, which had expanded significantly since Delacroix's elimination. About falling in love with my target? About choosing you over my career? About becoming the kind of person who protects instead of destroys? Any of it? All of it. I looked around Brandon's study, filled with books and art and evidence of a life built on both darkness and beauty. I thought about the path that had brought me from professional killer to protector, from emotional isolation to love. None, I said honestly. Though I still can't believe you fell for someone who was literally hired to murder you. Sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones most worth loving. Is that a crime boss philosophy? That's a human philosophy. Sometimes the people who understand darkness are the ones who most appreciate light when they find it. As Brandon pulled me close for a kiss that tasted like wine and promises, I marveled at how completely my life had changed. I'd started this assignment as a hunter, focused on one target and one outcome. Instead, I discovered something I'd never expected to find, a reason to stop running, a person worth protecting, and a love worth any risk. Sometimes the best targets are the ones you miss on purpose.